Well, welcome back to your Always Free podcast, guys. I hope you're doing well. If this is the first time you're listening, this is the #1 podcast for financial empowerment and wealth creation. And if it is your first time you're listening, make sure you go back to episode 1, start there, because you're going to get the most out of this podcast. If you start listening to them in the order that I created them intentionally for, you're going to get most out of it then, as I give you the strategies in order. So go and do that. And if you're still listening at episode 6 to my nasally voice, send me a message, let me know what you think. I hope you're enjoying it, and if you're not new, welcome back. Of course, you're in for a treat today because we've got a guest, Brian Keane. And Brian is someone who I would say really truly embodies freedom, discipline, living life on your own terms. This is why it's such a great fit, and I'm excited to have a conversation with him. Brian's a best-selling author. He's got multiple books, and don't have a go at me because I'm still getting my first one out in since 2018. But all right, I got there in the end. But he's a renowned fitness coach. He helps his businesses. He helps fitness businesses. He runs a podcast. All of the description of the stuff that he's got are in the description of this podcast, and he'll introduce himself in just a moment as well. But top guy. I've featured on his podcast as well, and we had such a great conversation. We had it just flowed so well, and before you know it, the hour was gone. So I think you guys are going to get a lot out of this one. We're going to go deep on mental resilience, discipline. We're going to go into business and what real freedom is like when all these cameras are off that are always in our face. So Brian, mate, thanks for coming on. Welcome to Always Free.
An absolute pleasure, Jason. Really looking forward to chatting, mate. We had an absolute blast on my podcast. So yeah, delighted to be doing technically a round 2 now.
Amazing. Yeah, I can't wait for this. So, mate, just give us there's one thing for me to give an introduction. What would you say that that you're most inspired to help people achieve? What is it that you're here for, mate?
We stem from very similar hymn sheets when it comes to our messaging online. I think it's why we connect so well in terms of the promotion and the way that we speak to people, because you speak a lot about becoming free from the rat race, free from financial obligations, living that life of freedom and financial freedom. I'm all about giving people choices. And one of the things that makes me jump out of bed every morning, particularly, is working with other entrepreneurs and business owners so that they're building a business they don't want to retire from. And it's a weird paradox when you're making decisions based on what would you do for free, which is something very similar to you. What would your business look like? You said on my show, if you didn't need the money, if you weren't doing it for money. And the language I've used is, what would I do for free? And I, for 4 years, worked as a primary school teacher, actually in London in the UK. So my original degree and job and career and occupation was as an elementary school, primary school teacher. Mm-hmm. And I was, I'd say, 30 minutes into my very first day as a teacher in a school in West London in front of 37-year-old children. And I thought, oh, I don't want to be a teacher. This isn't what I want to do. And the analogy that I've used in books that resonates with people is that it felt like I spent years climbing a ladder only to realize it was up against the wrong wall. And I know you had a similar feeling in 2015 where you felt very unfulfilled. You were financially okay, but you felt very unfulfilled in what you were doing. I wasn't financially okay, and I felt unfulfilled in what I was doing. So that's a bad combination. And I came home that Christmas. It was in 2011. And I remember going to my mum, very similar to you, very close with my mum. And I went to tell her how much I hated my job. I hated my career. I was stuck in this sunk cost fallacy. I've spent all this time, energy, and money becoming a teacher, and I don't want to be a teacher. And she asked me that question that I've since used probably 1,000 times and more. What would you do for free? And I asked and thought, oh, I would do something in fitness for free. I was like, if I got paid to clean the floor in a gym, I would be happy. I would be happier than I am now teaching in a job that I hate. I was the first in school every day, the last to leave, bringing books home with me to mark. I wasn't able to work out. I wasn't able to train. I just didn't have enough time. Literally the day would run away with me, and then I'd fall asleep on the couch and then wake up in the morning and have to go back to school again and go back to work. And to cut a very long story short, I went and got what at the time was the most basic level 2 fitness instructor course you can get. And I had the complete opposite feeling that January when I went back to London of, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what this looks like in the grander scheme, but my ladder's against the right wall here. It's at the bottom, but it's against the right wall. And then fast forward 12, 13 years later, I've written 4 best-selling books. I've got 2 very successful podcasts. I've got my mentorship business program. I've got my fitness business, which is basically scaled and automated now with staff kind of working and doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me. I've got an online social media presence. I get to travel around the world doing really cool events. I brought a group of my followers up Mount Kilimanjaro in November. I'm bringing a group of my followers to Everest Base Camp next year. I get to document these awesome challenges and races like running through the Sahara and running through the Arctic and 100-mile ultramarathons. And I get to document that online. And now I get to live a life of choice and freedom and getting and teaching other people how to do the same with their version of that is something that gets me excited still to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening, guys, you can see why it's such a strong alignment. I mean, that's what this whole podcast is about, is being who you want to be, you know, doing your most meaningful work so that nothing feels like work, you know, nothing, you don't have a job, you don't buy in, you don't subordinate to the idea of retirement or anything like that. It's just you're living and you're doing what you would choose to do, uh, which is so awesome, man. And when you was a teacher, you know, you had this kind of intuition. I think, you know, that's what we're listening to. We want to listen to the intuition of who is it that I truly want to be. You immediately identified that you didn't want to be a teacher, and there's lots of people listening to this. You know, I've worked with celebrities. I've worked with people on, you know, in TV, in boy bands. I've worked with people who are doctors, accountants, surgeons, who have all kind of just gone with the flow, thinking or seeing the fantasy side of something and not really asking themselves if it was truly for them or not. And usually when they get into their mid 30s or late 30s, they start having to go, do you know what? I wish I'd done that. And then they have to kind of reverse engineer their life to get them back to what they always should have done in the first place. And it's much harder to do it that way if they'd just done it in the first place. So intuition's such a big thing to listen to, and I think we ignore it a lot. What does intuition look like? What role does intuition play in your business now as a business? Do you know, is that a big part of it?
Yeah, it's huge. Jason, you used the word alignment and aligned earlier. Something that I try and do with business, I actually try and do this in all facets of my life, but to keep it specifically domain dependent for business, is stay aligned, serving the people I want to serve, who I think I can help the most. That's a big
Yep.
part. And that sounds weird, but similar to not wanting to be a teacher, I know who I don't want to work with. So by proxy, my message automatically filters a lot of those people out. You're not going to follow my content. You're not going to sign up to my programs. You're not going to buy or read my books if you want somebody to say, get rich quick, get in shape in 6 days, lose 20 pounds in 6 days, the shortcut, quick fix. You're not following my content if that's what you want. I'm going to
Yeah.
talk about habit formation and sustainability and tuning in to what you should be doing, your alignment. So your intuition is that internal voice. It's literally telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing. We all have it because, like, again, I don't want to speak to your past, but I can definitely speak to my past. When you've been out like in nightclubs, you've been chatting to a girl, you meet someone in a coffee shop, and your intuition is like screaming, no, 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 but your eyes or another body part is screaming, yes, yes, yes. Like that intuition is there, and we're just choosing to ignore it. That's an extreme example of it. But people
Yeah.
will do it, and we'll do it all the way through our daily lives. We'll have that little bit of a gut feeling of, no, or worse, we'll numb it out. Netflix, alcohol, drugs, things that just completely disconnect you from what's actually important.
Escapism.
Escapism. It's $1 billion industry and more, because it's easier to just numb out and escape than to actually check in with, actually, I don't want to be doing this. I hate my job, but I need the paycheck. And that's not to disregard and make little or minimize people's situations. People have
Yeah.
bills, they have mortgages, they've got kids to feed, they've got families to support. But what I always try and think about, it's that old cliche of, your mind is like a parachute. Its usefulness is in its openness. Like, just open your mind up to, right, I'm not happy where I'm at now. You can sit with that for a moment and go, well, am I doing something? One of my favorite acronyms is how can I win? WIN. What's important now? What's the thing I can do today that will potentially get my ladder up against the right wall in a career, in a business? It doesn't mean you have to do it today, next week, next month, or even next year, but just getting your
Mm,
ladder up against the right wall. And intuition is one of those things that we all have that we
yeah,
drown out, that I think we can potentially get better at listening to over time if we just, use different tools to potentially support it.
I agree. And I think as entrepreneurs, from what I've witnessed, is you can be working on something for a long time. Entrepreneurs like exciting new things, and they feel like sometimes a new project might be a good idea, and they try and create something that isn't aligned. It just feels different and it feels exciting and it's outside the norm. It's not really moving the needle. And before they know it, they've ended up calling someone a pain in the ass because it's really getting on their nerves, and it's they're resentful for the person that they've gone. So with alignment, with intuition, and building a purpose driven business, how do you decide what opportunities to say no to, even if they're like lucrative or high profile or in your business?
I love that question, Jason. My filter is if I would promote or do this thing for free, I'll take money for it.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
yeah.
That's it, right? Such a
It
simple answer, but so
yeah.
powerful.
It eliminates 99%, 99.9% of opportunities that come your way.
I 100% agree. I mean, I would have probably answered that exactly, almost word for word. Um, but yeah, that is it. Um, but you have built you've built a strong like personal brand or purpose driven business. I kind of purpose driven business, I think people don't really understand. Essentially, a business in my mind is an extension of you, and whatever you're passionate about, whatever you're inspired to teach and talk about, that's what you're trying to help other people see and open their eyes to. And that to me is a purpose driven business. It's you expressing your purpose and what your highest values onto people, and trying to serve people who want to be that and have that result, right? So I think you've done that really well. You've built a really strong purpose driven business. But if someone was listening to this thinking this is really inspiring, I want to start a purpose driven business, what advice would you give them?
Oh, I love that one too. I'm actually going to double back and then I'm going to answer this directly because you said something very interesting there that I want to pick up and just add on and piggyback on about jumping around different things that might be misaligned. A superpower in business, the superpower answer that I always give is the secret to business is find something that you find easy that other people find difficult. That's as close to a secret sauce as you're going to get in business. Now, again, what doors that open, everyone's going to have a different answer to. But following your curiosity is actually a very useful business strategy. And not because it's misaligned, because of shiny object syndrome or just wanting to do something different. Like I think back to you in 2015 when you started putting out more content, started creating things for people. You were clearly feeling unfulfilled, but you were following your curiosity, something that you had solved, problems that you had solutions for, and then putting it out there for people for how you did it, how they can do it as well. There's a curiosity element to that. So for people that are listening who want to build a purpose driven business, and doing it from scratch is different than doing it from a moving start. If you're doing it from scratch, you're starting with curiosity. What am I curious about? And what's the thing that I find easy that other people find difficult? You gave a great example on my podcast about when you were in school and one of the teachers calling you out when you were talking about an Excel sheet. I had a flipped experience. I didn't do very well in school. And it's so funny now because a real weird moment was those people when you start hiring the people who are A students, and you're their boss. It's a really weird position to be in when you're like, these were the smartest people in school who made me feel like an idiot all the time, and now I'm paying their wages every month. That's a really weird disconnect, but in a beautiful, don't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree or go through its whole life thinking it's stupid, to quote an Albert Einstein line, that everyone has these talents and curiosities and gifts that they need to follow. And when you think about what makes you curious, what area you're curious about in the beginning, and you think about what you find easy that other people find difficult. I think back to when I was in university, when I went to college, I did a marketing undergraduate before I became a teacher. And I'll never forget when I was 15, I signed up to a school play to be a narrator of a school play because I was terrified of public speaking. And I remember thinking, I need to just get over this. This is something that I don't want to be afraid of. And I put myself forward for public speaking when I was 15 in front of the whole school,
Wow.
parents, and it was one of the best things I ever did. But interestingly, it didn't pay off until 2 years later, 3 years later, when I went to university, and I was about to give my first ever marketing presentation. And I was in a group with three other girls, and they were bricking it before the presentation, like literally palm sweaty, nearly getting sick, and I was itching to go. I was like, I can't wait. I'm like, put me in front of these people. I was like, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And it was in that moment, and I was 17, early starting university, thinking, oh my God, I found that really easy. And there's other people here who are actually going to get sick at even the thought of doing this. And it made me think, okay, well, I should be doing something in front of people. Straight and first and foremost, by put me in front of a room, the more people that are in front, I did my biggest ever keynote talk was in front of at Google headquarters. The more people you put me in front, the better. And that's a secret sauce for me. Everybody listening has a version of this. It might be you have lots of talents, but like analytics are massive for you. It's why you've been able to be financially free, build up a massive YouTube. So that's one of your gifts and talents. I hate analytics. I've got one of my team who does that for me, and they just send me the synopsis because it's not my strong suit. I'm like, right, cool. Tell me what videos worked where people switched off and just give me the synopsis of it. And so everyone has things that they're good at. People have things that they're bad at. And in the beginning, looking to build a business, purpose-driven life or purpose-driven business, following the curiosity is what I would advise if you're going from 0 to 1. What are you curious about? What's something that you find easy that other people find difficult? And where is it? It's an ikigai, the Japanese term of like, how do you serve people in a meaningful way? What way can you potentially serve people based on your history, based on your story? If you're already moving and you're now pivoting, the answer is slightly different, because if you have a financial stream, a revenue stream, a business, a market, a niche that you serve, you don't want to just shut that down to 0 to go do something else. What you do is you have 2 feet for a reason. You put 1 foot into the old business, you put 1 foot into the new business, and you start testing out ideas and building out this other thing on the side. When I had my fitness business and then I built out a consulting for business mentorship, I didn't stop my fitness business. I put it on an MED. I put it on a minimum effective dose. I hired in more people. I scaled the program. I set it up and structured it different so it would free up more time for the consulting and the mentorship. And then I was able to do that. And right now we're scaling that because of the demand. And then if I move into something that's going to be different, I put both of those in a minimum effective dose. Maybe you hire a few more people. Maybe you bring on new systems. You bring in AI, and then you go and try out this new thing. So the answer, if you're going from 0 to 1, is slightly different than if you're already moving, but hopefully there's value there for both.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, I always say if you can't like build systems and delegation, you really struggle to get to the next level of unlocking your potential and being free. So that's a great point. But you mentioned a lot there, so I'm going to do my best to kind of base the next question off of 3 really important things you spoke about. One was identity. You was identifying who you was and what your strong points were. The second one was like that whole belief transference, that belief cycle. You'd already been out on stage and done that public talk. So it's like, what's the worst that could happen? I know that it can't be worse than what I've already done. So you was geared up for it. Whereas the other two, they'd probably never had a talk before and they're bricking it, right? As you say. And then the last thing you spoke about is fitness. You went into fitness, right? So you went into, that was your primary calling, I guess. So you was going to talk to people on stage, educate them around fitness. With all that said, and based off like identity in particular, how do fitness goals, like, and the way that we see ourselves and the standards that we have on ourselves, how do fitness goals tie into how we see ourselves and what we believe we're capable of? Because I think your standards of your body can dramatically increase standards in the outside world.
I think fitness, and I'm probably one of the more holistic style coaches out there, because I think fitness is just a metaphor for how we approach everything in life. The skill set that requires you to get physically fit, being consistent, normally having a plan or setting goals and targets and mini milestones that help you stay motivated along the way, doing the thing you have to do regardless of how you feel, working with coaches who can educate you, or spending the time equity to educate yourself on nutrition and training. They're the exact same things that make you successful in business. They're the exact same things that make you successful in most areas in life. So fitness is actually just a massive metaphor. You used an example on my show about building out speculative investments as your cards. So the foundation being at the bottom and having your cards as the foundation versus having them as the roof at the top.
Yeah.
Fitness is like that. People that jump into supplements first, not looking at nutrition.
Yeah.
That's building
Ads.
it's building a really bad foundation. But when you were in fitness, what I loved about it, and for those just that aren't familiar with me and my background, I played sport most of my life. I competed in bodybuilding for 2 years. I was a fitness model, so I traveled around the world doing those photo shoots, magazines, etc. And then when my daughter was born in 2015, I took a complete reevaluation of my life, and I ended up writing my first book, The Fitness Mindset, that completely, truth be told, did way better than I ever imagined. It's more than 500,000 copies sold at the time of recording, and I never ever expected that book to do as well as it did. 16 weeks on the Amazon bestseller list, bestseller in all the stores it was in Ireland. It opened up more doors and opportunities than I ever thought possible. Ironically, we actually have very similar stories here with your video that did 7.1 million on YouTube in terms of the view count. I wrote that book for my clients who were struggling with fitness, because most of them knew how to get in shape and didn't know how to stay in shape. So the first book's The Fitness Mindset. First half is all fitness, second half's all mindset. And my thinking when I was writing that book was, if it only helps my current clients, this book will be worth it. And then ironically ended up helping way more people. So there's a little bit of an echo in terms of your approach to the YouTube video, your strategy versus how I wrote my first book.
Yeah.
And because of that, what fitness taught me off the back of that book coming out, I started to go into ultra marathons. So I did Marathon des Sables in 2018, which is 6 back-to-back marathons through the Sahara Desert, self-sufficient. I ran through the Arctic a year later, 230 kilometers, and then I did a 100-mile ultra marathon in Nevada in 2020, right before the lockdown. And what ultra marathons taught me, and that world taught me, was building the belief, building the confidence, taking the don't get too high on the highs, don't get too lows on the lows. Put one foot in front of the other, pivot and course correct if you go off track. If you need to double back, that's fine, but make sure you're directionally going the right way. There's so many metaphors and so many skills that you'll acquire from physical fitness, from gym and CrossFit to bodybuilding to sport to ultra running, that will directly influence you as a person, directly influence you as an entrepreneur, directly influence you as a business owner. And what you're looking to do is make sure you don't have that domain dependence. I always think, but this happens still to this day, Jason. There's a girl in my gym. Oh my God, if she ever hears me talking about it on a podcast, she's going to be like, I hate that Brian. He's such a dick. Like, she, every single day, she takes the stairs or takes the lift, avoids the stairs to go on the Stairmaster. Every day, every single day, she drives to the gym and takes the lift up to the second floor of the gym and then walks on the Stairmaster and avoids that is domain dependent knowledge. That is not taking knowledge from one area and applying it to another. As an
Yeah.
entrepreneur and as a business owner, you never want to be that person taking the lift to go on the Stairmaster. So if you're into physical fitness, think about what skills has physical fitness taught me to be good at business, or to flip it. I'm really good at business, but I'm not looking after my physical health. What's the skill set that makes me successful at business that I can apply to my fitness? And then that whole circle links up.
What have you noticed about people who transform their bodies but still like stay stuck in other areas of life, or does that not happen very often?
I see it happen all the time, unfortunately. It's exactly what I come back to, that domain dependent knowledge. They don't and haven't applied the things that make them successful in one area and taken those skills and applied them in another area. And you see this all the time. I know
Mm.
a lot of the people I work with, not so much now, but in the earlier days when it came to building businesses, a lot of these people were tremendous at either their craft as a personal trainer or fitness coach, and had PhDs, MAs, alphabets, the whole alphabet followed them around because they had so many names, numbers, and letters after their names, but they didn't know how to run a business. And sometimes all I'd have to do is go, look, what made you successful in academics? What made you successful in building your own physical body? Now let's take these and apply them to your business. And sometimes you have to put that beginner hat on, and that's an ego thing that holds a lot of people back. Not anchoring in that every master was once a disaster. Imposter syndrome is a very real thing, and putting on that beginner hat is really important, and it's difficult to do. Especially success is addictive, and if you're really successful, sometimes because you're already successful with a great body or great academics, etc., it's hard to go back to the beginning and go, well, actually, I don't really know how to run a business here. That can be very humbling for people. But it's like the gym. You go into the gym, leave the ego at the door. That's one of the things you'll always say for anyone that's like a time under tension coach or a non-strength based coach. It's like, leave the ego at the door. Do progressively overload and improve your physical body and fitness program based on how your body's responding. Sometimes business is exactly the same. And unfortunately, if you're not willing to put on the beginner hat, if you're not willing to be coached, you know
Yeah.
this, that one,
Coachable attitude. Yeah.
oh, it's so important. And if you don't have that, it's kind of like, I suppose the only analogy you can give is like trying to run a marathon on one leg. Like, you're trying to do a hard thing and you're just making it
Yeah.
harder. So that is something that I think, be coachable. Know that you have skill sets that made you successful with your physical fitness that you now need to apply to your business. And unfortunately, it's something that I see a lot. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, maybe it's the reason I have such a good consulting business, because there's a lot of people who fall into that bracket, less so in recent years, but it's definitely a very, very real thing for a lot of people.
Absolutely. So a couple of questions then, which kind of conflict each other. What I had recently, I had my friend Kirk Miller on, and he's very
Yeah,
similar
Kirk's
to you.
great. Yeah, Kirk's great.
He's very all about mindset, and we was talking about the importance of mental leverage when you're struggling, when you really want to quit, right? Now, you just mentioned you've done some horrific challenges, 100-mile runs or whatever, and multiple marathons back to back and Ironmans and all the rest of it, right? But you've written books as well, by the way, which is 10 times harder than any of that. No, but what's your own internal dialogue for when you want to give up? Like, because we're all constantly talking ourselves to stop, right? When I go to the gym, sometimes I don't have a trainer with me. I'm like, just don't do anymore, just cut that thing. And my body wants to give up. And there's been times in business where you think, man, I should just go back on the tools and be a trader. I should just go and get my electrical kit out and stuff. And I've had those thoughts before. But what goes through your head? You just keep going. You need to keep going.
If if we're looking at it with that lens, because not all suffering is valuable, if we're looking at it with the lens that it's something you want to do and it's physically hard, that's different than, this is, my ladder's against the wrong wall, I should quit.
100%.
Yeah. So I want to just
Yeah.
preface with that, because some jobs you should quit, some
You
relationships
should
you
give up.
should
Yeah,
quit,
yeah, yeah.
some programs you should quit. But when it's something that is important to you, I wrote a very popular, it's actually my most quoted back section in my second book, Rewire Your Mindset, and I call it the 97-year-old rule. It's, what would I regret more on my
Yeah.
97-year-old deathbed? And
Love that.
the example I give, when I was in the Arctic, I was ran 230 kilometers over 5 days in the Arctic. And the Arctic, whatever about the Sahara, that was 6 marathons in 6 days. Oh my God, the Arctic is absolutely brutal. It is brutal. The conditions, you're fighting against Mother Nature. It was the most difficult environment I've ever physically put myself into. But I tore my Achilles 86 kilometers from the end of that run,
Wow.
and strapped up my Achilles so tight and took painkillers that would probably knock a baby rhino to try and get to the finish line, which I did. It took me 86 kilometers of pulling one foot behind me. But part of that came down to, this was February 2019. Rewind the clock back to November 2018. I was doing an ultra marathon in Barcelona. It was a 76-kilometer ultra marathon, and I had got very high on my own supply. I had just done 6 back-to-back marathons in the Sahara, and I thought I was unstoppable. I was like, I am a badass. I'm a beast. This was the language going on in my head. I wasn't saying
Yeah,
it
yeah,
physically,
yeah.
but this is what was going on in my head. And I said, okay, I'll sign up to this race in Barcelona. It'll be good training before the Arctic. I landed out to Barcelona on what I thought was a 76-kilometer run on the road. It wasn't. It was a trail, the first of which climbing up Mount Tibidabo, which is the highest peak in Barcelona. It had been the rainiest November on record to that point. And I got about 40 kilometers into that run, and I started. This was a metaphor for my life, or a story for my life. At the point, I met this girl who was on a run, very attractive girl who I started following and chatting to. Turns out she was on a different run, a different race. So I went to her checkpoint, and they were like, "Mate, you're not in this race." They said it in Spanish, and then she translated it for me, and I was like, "Oh Jesus, Brian." So I said, okay, I'm out. I'm done. This is stupid. I've after following this girl for 7 kilometers, I'm on the wrong side of where I'm supposed to be. I have 30 kilometers left. I'm out. So I went back to my hotel. I got showered. I got fed. And I was sitting on the bed in the hotel going, oh, shit.
Mm.
I thought, oh, this feels rubbish. This feels horrible. And then I got this really scary thought. If I go to the Arctic in 4 months with this attitude, I'm going to die in the Arctic. I was like, I came out here thinking I can do anything. I'm beatable. I'm unstoppable. And if I go to the Arctic, I'll die. I will literally physically die in the Arctic. And when my Achilles tore, and there was a picture that went viral in the Irish newspapers here, because when you're in the Arctic, it gets very, very cold. It drops as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius. But you have to be in this weird Goldilocks zone in the Arctic, because if you're going too fast, you'll sweat and your risk of hypothermia goes up. If you're going too slow, your risk of frostbite goes up. But when my Achilles tore, it was like somebody shot me in the back of the leg, and I was pulling my leg behind me. And because I was moving so slowly, all the water in my eyeballs, I couldn't blink. So because the water started to freeze over, so my eyes went bloodshot red like a recording light on an interview. And I went into this tent. So every 12 kilometers or so, the local indigenous Sami tribe, they're a reindeer tribe in the Arctic, set up a tent. They put holes in the water, they put fire, and then they give you water from your special flask so that you're able to stay hydrated. And I went into this tent, and I looked at a medic, or a medic came to look at me, and she was like, your Achilles is torn. She was like, if you keep going, it's going to rupture. And I sat there in the probably arguably the most physical pain of my life. And I thought back to Barcelona, and I thought back to, oh, I felt horrible when I tapped out of that. And I said to her, is there any chance I can keep going? She goes, you can, but I'm going to have to strap your ankle really, really tightly. And she goes, but it still could rupture. I said, okay, check my battery, my GPS. Is it working? I said, what happens if my Achilles ruptures? She goes, well, we're going to have to fly a helicopter in here for you. And I said, is that doable? And she goes, well, yeah, you have a GPS. She's like, we're not going to leave you in the Arctic. I said, okay, strap it. I said, strap it. I said, I'm going to keep going. And fast forward 86 kilometers, I got to the end. The medic gave me a big, massive hug at the end. She was like, I thought you were going to die in the Arctic. So glad you didn't die. This would have been horrible exposure for everybody here. And I was like, yes, I'm happy I didn't die as well. And that came down to the 97-year-old rule of using what I call an anchor point in the past when you felt horrible about quitting something, because we've all had a moment when we shouldn't have quit and we did. Using that anchor point and bringing that into the present moment to help you persevere through. Tapping into your why is very important as well. I have my daughter. She was 10 last week. My daughter's a big, big influence for me, a big why. And I will tap into that regularly. And, I didn't want to be someone that got pulled out of an 86 kilometers from the end. I wanted to cross the Arctic Circle line. I'd been training for this for nearly a year. And using the 97-year-old rule, I would have regretted not trying. I didn't want to die. It's why I asked the question about my GPS. But I would have regretted if I could still move and I didn't. So checking in with the 97-year-old rule, and then using those anchor points and tapping into your strong why. I think if you can do those three things, it means you're going to be able to persevere with that CrossFit workout, that 10-kilometer run, that half marathon, that difficult situation you're going through. The mantra that pain is temporary in nearly all cases is really useful. I knew at some point my Achilles wouldn't be torn. At some point, it wouldn't be minus 38 degrees. At some point, I wouldn't be in as much physical pain like somebody was shooting me with a cattle prod on every step. At some point, this pain will go away. And just repeating that mantra over and over again until I got to what was my end goal or my end result. And again, that can be really useful. It's a very extreme example, but everyone has versions of this in their own life they can potentially tap into.
Absolutely, man. And I always say like everything's half true as well. So like whatever your perception is, it's half true. And there's things we should have quit and we didn't, and there's things that we should quit and we did. We shouldn't have quit and we did. And at that moment in time, what we're doing is either beating ourselves up or feeling cocky, or be puffing ourselves up and feeling elated, or putting ourselves down and feeling depressed. And it's all half true, man. And I think, the question that I was going to ask you is, how do you kind of balance being kind to yourself whilst holding yourself to a high standard? And I think that 97-year-old rule is a great one. I think that's amazing.
Can I add to it though, Jason? Because
Yeah.
that's a beautiful add-on that you've given. Self-compassion and tough love are the two languages I use personally, and they're like tools for a specific job. You can hang a picture on your wall with a sledgehammer, but it's the wrong tool for the job. And different tools require different situations, or different are required for different situations. When I'm 22 miles into a 26-mile marathon, I don't need to be self-compassionate with myself. I don't have to be like, oh, that's enough now. You've done 22 miles there, Brian. You're grand. Go over there now, have a cup of tea and relax. That's not. I need somebody being like, my internal voice needs to be like, keep going. You're
Yeah,
nearly
yeah.
there. 4 miles. Keep going and count it down. 1 foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. But if I've been a bit disconnected with my daughter or my partner, or haven't really shown up the way I wanted with a loved one, beating myself up just makes a bad situation worse. There are
Hmm.
the days when I have to apply a bit of self compassion and go, well, actually, you didn't really be as present as you'd have liked today. You didn't
Mm.
react the way you wanted to respond when, the figurative glass of milk spilt and you got angry. That's the day you reflect and go, try and be better tomorrow. Try and be a little
Yeah.
bit better tomorrow. If this happens again, you now know how you don't want to act. You now know how you don't want to react. There's a famous line in Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl, one of my favorite books, that in between impulse and action is a space, and in that space we get a choice to choose, to paraphrase his line. And you don't want to be reacting to things, you want to be responding. That's when you use self-compassion. Beating yourself up doesn't help with that, but they're different tools for different jobs. So the secret sauce is in the filtering to know what tool to use in what situation. And I think
Yeah.
if you're able to do that, and there's a line in the Bible, and I'm not religious at all, but I love the line, to the man with the hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. If you're using the same tool for every job, you're going to run up against some pretty heavy obstacles, either self-defined or otherwise, and it's just not useful. You know this, Jason. You're not going to apply the trading tools to how you are with fitness, to how you are in business. There's different tools for different jobs. The secret sauce is in knowing when to apply and what to apply in what situation.
Love that, man. You mentioned your daughter, and she's kind of changed your perspective. I think like it's when you have kids, when you're approaching situations in general, you're more, me personally, I'm thinking, how can I approach this in a way where I could teach, if my sons ever asked me a question about this, what would be the answer that I'd be happy to give them and then die. So that's the only
Mm.
answer I can give them. And it makes you evaluate situations differently. It makes you get perspective on things um more clearer. And you mentioned your daughter. How has, since you had kids, how's that changed your perspective on success and freedom?
It's a very well-rounded question, because my metrics of success were different before my daughter was born.
Mm.
Finances, status, they were very strong pulls for me. And Naval Ravikant has a great line that I love: when you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And status is a very stupid game to play, because somebody else has to drop off and lower down for you to raise up.
Yep.
Wealth creation is a positive sum game. I can be rich, you can be rich. I can be wealthy, you can be wealthy. And so can a lot of people listening. It's a positive sum game. When Holly was born, I started to shift more away from zero sum games into positive sum games. And even my business changed off the back of that, because pre 2015, it was all about me. How can I build my business? How can I grow? After she was born, it started kind of shifting towards that. And it's such a cliche, but losing yourself and finding yourself by losing yourself in the service of others became a North Star. And it hadn't been prior to that. And how can I win by giving away everything for free? A conversation we had on my podcast. How can I win by making the world a little bit better because I'm here? You don't call people out heavily on social media. I don't call people out heavily on social media because there's a lot of negativity on social media and I don't want to contribute to that. That's not the kind of brand I want to build.
No,
So
I'm the
I
same.
yeah, and that comes down back to the alignment. That comes down to
Yeah.
intuition. That comes down to your values. When my daughter was born, a lot of that shifted, and it made me less. I won't say egocentric, but it definitely made me take a broader perspective on it because it just shifts with, you know, it's a weird analogy to use, but even how I show up with my partner, my girlfriend, is I know my daughter, I'm the bar for the man that she's potentially going to end up with. So I'm like, set that bar high. Set
Yeah.
that bar high. She's watching what I'm doing, how I'm showing up, how I'm being.
Yeah.
And that gives me a compass for how to behave day to day. Business is
Yeah.
kind of similar because my mother used to tell me, don't ever do anything in your business that you wouldn't want someone to see on the front of a newspaper. And that's really helpful advice.
Such good advice, mate.
It filters a lot of things out in terms of decisions.
So good.
And doing that with, building something that you want your family to be proud of, again, puts the whole recipe together for the cake.
Man, I love that. I've often said that, like, if you're not happy to have cameras on you 24/7, you're not loving something about yourself. You're not wanting to express something on the outside world. And so just to kind of go there and imagine having cameras on you 24/7, it helps you pinpoint what you don't love about yourself, what you're trying to hide from the world, and really start working on that, or do less of it, or it's a mechanism to be more of who you truly are, not trying to be someone that you're not. And I think social media is full of people pretending they're someone they're not, and there's only so long you can do that for. And they say that imitation suicide and all that, but when you're your true self and you've got a message that you're inspired to go and share, and you go and do that, and it's coming from a place of authenticity, of congruency, and you actually do what you say you're going to do. To me, that's one of the best ways to live your life. And you will feel rewarded, you'll feel meaningful, you'll feel fulfilled. And, to me, that's what Always Free is about. It's about being free to share what's really important to you, and then having that fair exchange on the other side. There's no better way to live. So, mate,
Can I just add to that? Sorry, now, Jason, I'm jumping in
sure.
again. Just it's such a beautiful line that I want to build on because it also makes a lot of business sense. All the stuff you mentioned I would triple like that, reshare as much as possible because it echoes my thoughts exactly. But also it makes business sense. Something I've said on my business podcast for fitness professionals is you can't out James Smith, you can't out Joe Wicks. You can't out Jason Greystone. You can't out Brian Keane. And in that, when it comes to the authenticity, and it can take a while to find that, but there's something in your story. There's something in your history. There's something in your past. And again, without going down the shadow side, Jung is that famous shadow side, like you mentioned there about the cameras following you around and making peace with that shadow side so that you're not going through this life feeling like you're blocking half it out from everybody else and integrating that. One of my favorite brain tattoos is his line that, until you make the subconscious conscious, it'll define your life and you'll call it fate. One of my favorite lines of all time. And it's a really important thing to anchor and think about. But from a business perspective of leaning into who you are, your story, your history, it's a moat. Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett have that famous line in investing about what's the moat. What's built around your business that people can't directly copy. And if you're leaning into your story, leaning into your history, leaning into your curiosity, curiosity, leaning into the things that you find easy that other people find difficult, leaning into the storytelling element of all the people you've worked with. That's a moat. That's good business. So on top of it being fulfilling and making you live a life of freedom, it's also good business.
Yeah. That's beautiful, mate. And don't worry about people copying you or anything like that, because when you're truly yourself, they'll always be 10 steps behind, and all you can do is just focus on being the best version of yourself. Everything slots into place. And there's just one last question that I want to ask to the listeners, and then maybe to you, is to really start somewhere with what we've shared in this podcast. And by the way, none of this podcast was planned. This is an off the cuff conversation that was just, it flowed and went really, really quickly. And we just had another conversation on Brian's podcast. So we'll put all the links to all of his stuff and his podcast in the description of this one. But if you really just want to make a start, if you're listening to this and you feel fired up and you feel inspired, the first question, like, ask yourself this will really get you connected to who you truly are or who you want to be. And that is, what do you want people to say about you when you're not in the room? Yeah, that question, what would you love people to say about you when you're not there? When you're gone, how do you want people to talk about you? What would mean the world to you if they just said, Jason was this guy? Who is that? And once you know that, you can start moving into being that person and being congruent, where your words, your thoughts, your actions all align, and you do what you say you're going to do. So, Brian, mate, what would you want people to say about you when you're not in the room?
He's not a dickhead. Yeah. I think one of the most underappreciated,
so simple and so beautiful.
Yeah, one of the most underappreciated lines in all of business is, you'd be surprised how far you can get ahead by just not being a dickhead. Yeah.
I love that, mate. Well, on that note, don't be a dickhead. And until next time, guys, have a great rest of your day and weekend. And Brian, thanks for coming on, mate.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much again.
Take care.